Hello everyone, welcome back. I hope you enjoyed the last video, which was chapters 6 to 10 of The Crimson Moth or The Heartless Hunter by Kristen Ciccarelli. If you haven't already seen it, go listen to it before you listen to this one. I'll leave the link in the description below. This will be the next 5 chapters, chapters 11 to 15. Before we get started, I would greatly appreciate and love if you could like and subscribe to my channel. Also, please leave a comment down below if you have any book suggestions as to what I should read next, or if you have any feedback for me. I would love to hear from you. Without further ado, let's get started. 11. Rune. In her bedroom, the lamps were already lit. Their flames burned dimly as if the room had been patiently waiting for its mistress. Rune turned to Gideon, who looked like a wolf stepping into unfamiliar territory. Wary, aloof, ready to bare his teeth at the first sign of danger. His stony gaze scanned the room, taking in the lavender walls and the loft ceiling made of glass. Other than the 4-poster bed, there were only a few furnishings, all of them tasteful and understated, just the way Rune, the real Rune, liked things. The sea breeze blowing through the windows ruffled Gideon's hair. "This is your bedroom?" She clasped her hands in front of her. That's right. This was her favorite place, her safest place, and she had invited a dangerous enemy straight into it. "You said it belongs to a witch." He stalked slowly toward her, his gaze pinning her in place. "It belonged to my grandmother, yes." Gideon halted. "Did you think it would be that easy?" She frowned, staring at him. He wasn't very good at this game. Sudden footsteps made them turn toward the doorway, where Lisbeth stood. On the tray, gripped in her hands, sat 2 cups and a decanter of red wine. "Your refreshments, Miss Winters." Rune nodded her thanks. Lisbeth, who'd played her part in the charade dozens of times, brought the tray to the low table in front of the love seat. "A telegram arrived for you earlier. I'll leave it with your drinks." A telegram? It must have been from someone important. Otherwise, Lisbeth would have waited until tomorrow. "Oh, and..." She paused at the door. "Verity was looking for you. You can tell her where I am, and that I'll return to the party soon." Rune waited for Lisbeth to leave before sinking into the plush cushions of the love seat. Lifting the decanter, she poured wine into both cups. The one she enchanted earlier buzzed beneath her fingers. As Gideon sat down next to her, she held it out to him. He shook his head. "No, thank you." Rune's outstretched hand remained between them, holding out the wine. "Oh, you simply must try some." She forced a smile. "It's from a vintage collection. This bottle came all the way from the Umbrian Mountains on the continent. Lisbeth uncorked it for us. Here." She pressed it toward him. Gideon still didn't take it. "I don't drink." "What?" Cold sweat beaded down her back. Why hadn't Alex ever mentioned this important fact? She swallowed, the cup hovering between them. "Are you sure?" "Very sure." Rune's mind went strangely blank. This had always been the way. Pick a suitor, lure him away from the party, then ply him with truth-telling wine. Sometimes she got the information she needed, sometimes she didn't. But it was never because they refused her. "Please," said Gideon, his eyes narrowing as he studied her. "Don't abstain on my account." "Oh, I won't." A sip would relax her and help her reassess before forging a fresh path. Setting down the enchanted cup, she reached for the other. "Something wrong with that one?" Vroon froze like a rabbit in a snare. What? "The wine you offered me. After I refused it, you set it down and took the other." "Shoot. Did I?" Shoot. He stretched his arm across the back of the sofa, his hands gripping the smooth mahogany frame behind Vroon. "You wouldn't be trying to drug me, would you?" His mouth quirked, as if he were flirting, but his eyes were dark and the look in them dangerous. He knew. What had Alex told her earlier this evening? That if she tried a spell in Gideon's presence, he would smell the magic on her. Vroon tried not to panic. Every witch's magic smelled different. Vroon was only capable of minor spells and illusions, weak castings, making her magic scent hard to detect. In fact, the only person who'd ever recognized the scent of Vroon's magic was Verity. A few months after the revolution, Vroon had cast her very first illusion before attending a ball. Verity, who didn't know Vroon then, should have reported her the moment she smelled the magic. Instead, she took Vroon aside and told her to be more careful. They'd been friends ever since. "Even if Gideon suspects me, he has no proof." She put her cup down and lifted the enchanted one. Cupping the bottom of it with two hands, hiding the spell mark drawn there, she locked eyes with him, pressed the cup to her lips, and took a long swallow. "If it's been drugged," she said, coming up for air, "you'll know in a few minutes." Releasing his grip on the polished wood, he bent his elbow and leaned his temple against his fist. "Looking forward to it." As the alcohol flooded her, warming down to her legs, something rushed along with it. Magic. Like unruly ivory pushing out the windows of a house, forcing open the locks and letting itself in. She could feel Truth Teller breaking down her defenses, loosening her inhibitions, allowing someone to reach in and easily pluck what was inside. Vroon clung to the cup, wondering what the hell she was going to do. "It's your spell. Work around it." She had no idea if it was possible. She'd never tested Truth Teller on herself. But the enchantment wouldn't force its victim to offer the truth unprompted. If Gideon wanted to get something out of her, he needed to ask a question. And Gideon didn't know Vroon had enchanted the cup. Never mind enchanted it with the spell for telling the truth. So theoretically, he had no reason to interrogate her. "This will be fine. Stay calm." Hard to do when she felt like a cornered animal. Gideon sat inches from Vroon, making it easy to see how much bigger and stronger than her he was. She couldn't help but notice the warmth rolling off him. With it came a heady scent, not only of gunpowder, but something stronger, like freshly cut cedar. It was so pleasant she wanted to lean into it. Alarmed by the instinct, she immediately leaned away instead. Trying to appear unbothered by everything spinning out of her control, she reached for the folded telegram Lisbeth left on the tray and started to unfold it. "Is there a reason you abstain?" If she could keep him talking, it might prevent him from asking her questions. "I don't like not being in control of myself." But isn't that half the fun? She asked, glancing at him. He looked away, but not before his eyes darkened. I might have agreed with you once. Rune lowered the telegram, curious. Oh? There was a time when I needed it to survive, along with other, stronger substances. His lip curled, or that's what I told myself. Stronger substances? Rune wondered what those might be. Years ago, when the Sister Queens ruled, laudanum had been popular among Nan and her friends. Is that what he means? Alex could tell you all about it, I'm sure. Frustrated that she couldn't enchant the truth out of him, she asked, What if I want you to tell me about it? When he looked at her, his eyes were full of shadows. He didn't answer her question. Instead, he nodded to her telegram. A love poem from one of your admirers? No. Rune glanced down, reading the subject line, and immediately frowned. It's Miss Rune Winters, Wintersea House. The Ministry of Public Safety is delighted to name you guest of honor at next week's Luminaries Dinner. Please prepare a speech extolling the noble virtues of the Republic. See you Thursday next. Isla Woods, Public Safety Minister. Rune felt her legs go numb. The Luminaries Dinner was a monthly tribute to heroes of the Revolution, intended to bolster loyalty to the regime. Rune had planned to skip it this time because the last one had been so hard to stomach, and as she read the telegram again, her heart sank. If she declined to be their guest of honor, the tribunal would see it as disloyalty. She had to accept. Not only did she have no time to prepare a speech, but the Luminaries' dinner always required the worst kind of pretending. She would have to act proud of what she'd done, have to feign ambivalence about the violent loss of the person she loved most. Her speech would cheer the Republic while calling for more purging, and denounce the evil of witches in their midst. She would spit on Nan's memory yet again. In the beginning, pretending had been easier. Rune could push down her anger and grief. But the more fealty she swore to the new Republic, the more witches she failed to save, the harder it became. If there weren't 100 other reasons to despise Gideon Sharp, this would be sufficient. He didn't have to hide who he was. He didn't have to pretend to hate the things he truly loved. If she didn't loathe him so much, she might envy him. Rune fell back into the cushions. Wasn't Lola Parsons supposed to be the guest of honor this month? Gideon's brow furrowed as he glanced from her to the telegram. The guard took Lola into custody last week. He gently took the paper from her, scanning its contents. One of her servants reported a casting signature in her cellar. She denies it, but we believe she was harboring a witch. Oh. They're asking you to be the guest of honor instead? Rune nodded, a little numbly. His brow furrowed further. And that's a bad thing? Rune could feel the answer, the real one, surge up her throat. Yes, I can't stand it any longer. If I have to toast the villains who murdered my grandmother one more time, I'm going to set them all on fire. Her answer, the absolute truth of the situation, swelled on her tongue, pushing at the roof of her mouth. She could feel it slipping past her teeth. No. Panicking, Rune tried to think of any other reason this invite should upset her. If she could push out a smaller truth before the more dangerous one escaped, she might subvert the spell. I don't have a dress to wear. Gideon drew back, startled by the outburst. Rune clamped her mouth shut to prevent the real reason from escaping, but it subsided. For now, at least. He raised one dark eyebrow. Is that all? Curse him. The surge began again, because no, it was not all. Truth Teller was dragging the words from her depths like water from a well. I hate this horrible republic. I would burn it to the ground if I could. But if I don't play along, girls like me will continue to die. This time, when the words threatened to burst out from her, Rune squeezed her hands into fists as she held them back, trying to think of something, anything else to say. Something less damaging, but still true. There's no time to have a dress made. My seamstress is booked until next month, but the dinner is next week. Rune threw a pitiful look that wasn't entirely false. She'd gone hot all over and her heart beating painfully fast. That's unfortunate. But the spell wasn't finished with her. It snaked up her throat, threatening to choke her. Tell him, it prodded. Tell him the rest. And the words itched. She tried to swallow them, but couldn't. They'll want me to talk about Nan. She had his full attention now. He was staring at her, his gaze piercing. And you don't want to? She shook her head no, her eyes burning with tears that were building. She was terrified of blurting out the rest. Rune reached for her throat, prepared to squeeze if something worse tried to escape. As a hot tear slipped down her cheek, Gideon visibly softened. I'm sorry. It must have been hard to be raised by a witch. It wasn't a question, so Rune didn't have to answer. Her chest rose and fell with rapid breaths. He glanced over her shoulder. She followed his gaze. Between the translucent cerulean canopies of her bed, which were drawn back and tied to each of the 4 posts, an enormous portrait hung on the wall. Kestrel Winters took up most of the picture's frame. She wore a black velvet dress with lace trim, and she'd pinned her curls back, allowing the artist to catch every ridge and crease of her solemn face. She was close to 60 in this rendering, and her beauty often reminded Rune of a mighty oak. It was the child on Nan's lap, however, that drew the viewer's eye. She wore a crisp lace dress with pale blue ribbons, but that was where her elegance ended. Her cheeks were bright red from running, and her strawberry blonde hair, which had been painstakingly combed not long before this sitting, was a messy tangle. A grass stain spoiled the knee of one white stocking, and though Rune had been told to sit still, the artist couldn't paint over her fidgety energy. Her eyes were bright and full of mischief, as if she badly wanted to laugh but held it in for propriety's sake. It was Rune's favorite painting. She always felt like it was trying to tell her a secret. Keeping a portrait of a witch you betrayed wasn't illegal, but it might rouse Gideon's suspicions. I almost got rid of it after they purged her, she said softly, but I didn't want to forget that evil lurks where we least expect it, so I kept it to remind me. Gideon could interpret this to mean the evil of witches like Nan, but for Rune, the evil was in her own actions, in what she had done to the person she loved most. You were very cute, he said, studying the child in the painting. Rune glanced sharply up at him. The wine hadn't worked, but perhaps her tears had? Is that your weakness, she wondered, girls who cry? Either way, she hadn't lost this game yet. She needed to retake control before the spell forced an even deadlier truth from her. I was cute, she teased. Am I not any more? She couldn't coerce the truth out of him with wine, but there were plenty other ways to get information, methods she'd used on plenty of unsuspecting young men. The thought of using those same tricks on Gideon snarled her stomach in knots, but she'd run out of options. If she wanted to save Seraphine, she needed to find out where the blood guard was keeping her. Wherever that was, Gideon had likely put Seraphine there himself. He turned the full force of his attention on her, and she shivered beneath the weight of it. Cute? No. His gaze gleamed in the candlelight, taking her in. No, I wouldn't say that. She ran her fingers lightly down the edge of his lapel. How would you describe me, then? Gideon stayed silent, watching her fingers. Rune hated this part of the game. The flirtatious touching, which inevitably led to kissing, was always the last, most desperate step in obtaining information. But it was a necessary evil, and Rune would do whatever was necessary to save more girls from sharing her grandmother's fate, a fate Rune had delivered to her. Gideon still hadn't given her an answer. Well? She pressed her hand to his chest, preparing to run them over his shoulders. Surely you... He reached for her wrist, stopping her. Rune looked up to find his attention fixed on the hand he'd captured. Without speaking, his fingertips gently grazed her palm. Her heart climbed into her throat as he traced her fingers slowly. Slowly, like he knew exactly what he was doing, like he'd done it thousands of times before. She swallowed, her skin sparking wherever he touched her. Gideon leaned in, brushing his rough cheek against hers. Rune. His breath was warm against her throat. Do you want to go back? Back, she murmured. To the party. His fingers traced down her neck and across her collarbone. Your guests will wonder where we are. He was giving her an escape if she wanted it, like a gentleman. The thought startled her. She shook her head. Let them wonder, unless... Rune pulled back a little, peering into his face. She saw now that his eyes weren't black, but a deep, dark brown. Do you want to go back? He gave her an incredulous look. And do what? Make conversation with Bart Wentholt? He scowled. I have more stimulating conversations with my horse. It was so unexpected, Gideon Sharp making a joke, that a laugh burst out of Rune. He let go of her hand, falling quiet. When her giggling subsided, she looked over to find a thoughtful expression on his face. Your laugh is like a fuse, he said. It lights you up. Rune's heart thudded. No one had ever told her that before. He doesn't mean it. Gideon Sharp was a cold, heartless murderer, not a soft-hearted suitor. He played the same game she did and was more skilled at it than she'd thought. Fear nipped at her. Perhaps bringing him here had been a mistake. Her gaze trailed over him, the broadness of his chest and shoulders, the corded muscles in his arms, the shadow of soon-to-be stubble darkening his cheeks. He was so much bigger than her. If he wanted to, he could easily lift her up from the seat and carry her to the bed. Rune froze. Where had that thought come from? She reached for the cup of wine, a little shaky, no longer caring about the spell it carried. She was already enchanted, and took another sip, careful to conceal the bottom with her cupped hands. She needed to calm her nerves. Their eyes locked over the lip of the cup, and Rune slowly lowered the wine into her lap. As if knowing the effect he had on her, Gideon leaned in. Again, he lingered, touching his temple to hers, running the back of his fingers tenderly up her arm. Her skin blazed in his wake. His touch was stronger than the drink, pulling her under. How is he so good at this? Rune closed her eyes, trying to stay in control. How much time do you have? My next shift starts at dawn. His witch hunting shift, she told herself. Emphasis on the witch hunting. When his thumb stroked the line of her jaw, Rune had to bite down on a whimper. It was almost as if he were a weapon specifically designed to compromise her. "Hunting anyone in particular?" she asked. "Perhaps." His breath was hot on her neck. "Who?" He paused. "Why do you want to know?" Rune swallowed. Was that suspicion in his voice, or flirtation? "Danger, danger," said her brain. "What do you do with them when you—" Taking her chin gently in his fingers, Gideon turned her face toward his. His eyes were intense, his breathing shallow and uneven. "Rune," he said, pupils dilating. He looked hungry suddenly, like a man who hadn't eaten in years. "Less talking." He's going to kiss me, she realized. And the scariest thing was Rune wanted him to. More than she wanted information, more than she wanted to rescue Seraphine. In this moment, she wanted to know how his mouth would feel against hers. If it would be soft or rough. If it would be as tender as his fingers, or if he had given to that ravenous hunger, taking his fill of her. It shocked her out of her stupor. Rune was no longer the mimic spider luring her victim into a trap. She was inside her own trap, about to be devoured by her prey. Desperate to extricate herself, Rune remembered the cup still in her hands. Before getting completely overwhelmed her, she dumped her wine down the front of his suit. 12. Rune. Gideon shot like lightning from the sofa. On his feet, he stumbled away from Rune, staring down at the dark stain seeping through his rare and expensive jacket. Guilt pricked her like a pin. "Oh, Gideon, I'm so sorry." Rising from the love seat, Rune grabbed the wool shawl hanging off the back of her dresser chair. She felt shaky, light-headed. "Clumsy me, let me clean you up." He backed away from her, arms raised. "It's fine, please. Don't ruin your shawl." He unbuttoned the jacket, shrugged it off, and held it out to inspect the damage. "I'll call for Lisbeth. Maybe if she soaks it—" "What's going on here?" a voice exclaimed from the doorway. Rune spun to find Verity entering the room, pearls gleaming from her neck and wrists. She looked windblown and out of breath, as if she'd heard Rune's startled cry and, expecting the worst, ran to her bedroom. At the sight of Gideon, Verity abruptly halted, staring like she'd caught them in the middle of something scandalous. Her heart-shaped mouth formed a shocked O. "This appears to be my cue to leave," said Gideon. Folding his soggy jacket over one arm, he caught Rune's eye. "I'll see myself out, Miss Winters. Good night." Before she could answer, he trod past a still gaping Verity and disappeared into the hall. When he was out of earshot, Verity hissed, "Are you out of your mind?" She'd gone dark as a thundercloud. "That," Verity's index finger sliced the air in the direction Gideon had gone, "was not the plan. Gideon Sharp is not on your list." Rune crept to the door and peered out, watching the Blood Guard captain's form recede down the hall. She was warm all over, her body humming with the memory of their close encounter. When Gideon was good and truly gone, she said, "That's because he's never shown interest." Verity went quiet. "Has he shown interest?" Rune's skin buzzed where Gideon had reached for her chin. She could still hear the hunger in him as he murmured her name. Maybe? Either that, or he was a cold, calculating master of seduction. I don't know. Rune closed the door and turned to her friend. But he showed up tonight and gave me this. She tugged the silk rose from her hair, wincing as several strands came with it, and held it out for Verity to see. Suddenly, none of the names on your list were good enough. I had to improvise. Verity's mouth thinned to a hard line. She took the flower as if it were a living rose full of thorns. Something's amiss here, she said. Gideon Sharp doesn't court girls like Rune Winters. Ouch. For some reason, that stung. Gee, thanks, Verity. Verity glanced up. Oh, Rune, I didn't mean it like that. Rune brushed off the comment. Maybe he needs a rich wife. Maybe he gambles too much and is neck deep in debt. Or maybe he's playing with you, said Verity. Rune looked away, thinking of the enchanted wine, of the way his tracing hands knew exactly how to disarm her. He was experienced in a way Rune wasn't. That had been clear. Verity's right. I'm in way over my head. Gideon had turned the tables on her tonight, first with the wine, then on the love seat, and finally by refusing to give up the blood-guard secrets despite passionate distraction. None of her tricks had worked on him. Courting him, therefore, would mean enduring a high level of danger, but for how much reward? Sighing, Rune walked over to the bed and fell backward, letting the duvet catch her in its downy softness. Closing her tired eyes, she said, "It seemed like the perfect opportunity." "It's too much of a risk." Verity sat down on the bed and took Rune's hand, gripping it tight. Quietly, she said, "I don't want to lose you too." Rune heard what her friend didn't say. "I lost my sisters. You're all I have left." It was true for them both. Rune and Verity had lost the people who mattered most and only had each other now. And Alex. The bed's promise of blissful tranquility called to Rune. She'd ridden hard through terrible weather to get to Seraphine. Every bone in her body ached for rest. The longer she lay here, the more likely it was to drag her under. "Promise me you'll reject him and choose someone safer," said Verity. Rune knew she would heed her friend's wise advice. It only made sense to pursue someone easier and less dangerous than Gideon Sharp. But if Gideon already suspected her, wasn't courting him the best way to put those suspicions to rest? "Reject who?" interrupted a new voice. Rune's eyes flew open. She raised herself to her elbows, groaning a little at the fight against gravity, and saw Alex enter the room. "Your brother." Verity's hand was still clenched around the rose's wire stem. She held it out to him. "Maybe you can talk some sense into Rune." Alex took the rose. Sighing, Verity pushed herself from the bed. "I'll see you both back at the party." If I can make it that far, thought Rune, falling into the covers once more. Alex stared at Verity. "What's with her?" Rune made an inarticulate noise, too tired to explain. Claiming the spot Verity had vacated, Alex lay down beside her. Even with several inches between them, Rune felt the warmth of his body. Together they lay on their backs, staring at the stucco ceiling. "Where's Gideon?" Alex asked, voice tightening around his brother's name. He held up the silk flower, contemplating it. Rune winced, remembering their thinly veiled argument on the stairs earlier. She and Verity hadn't told him about the list of suitors, knowing he wouldn't approve. "Better to tell him once it's over and done," Verity said when she first made the list, remembering Alex's interference tonight Rune found herself inclined to agree. Alex was fiercely protective of his older brother. Gideon went home. Rune's eyes closed. The comforting call of sleep lapped against her mind like waves against the shore. A little voice inside Rune reminded her that her party wasn't over, that she needed to get up, go downstairs, and resume her role as a hostess. "Just a little rest," she told the voice, "and then I'll go down." Silence filled the space between them as Alex went to that quiet place inside himself where he could collect his thoughts, considering and arranging each one before showing them to the world. There was a time when his long stretches of silence had unnerved Rune. She didn't know what they meant and tried to fill the space with her words. But nearly a decade of friendship had taught her to love his silence, and now it was as comforting as his music. When he finally spoke, she was closer to asleep than awake. "Rune? Whatever you're doing with my brother needs to stop." The bed moved as he sat up, and Rune felt him reach down for her shoes, sliding one off, then the other. She wanted to tell him to keep them on, because she had to go back downstairs, but he continued before she could. "Hunting witches is Gideon's obsession. If he discovers what you are, he won't hesitate to kill you." "Why does he hate me so much?" she asked, eyes still closed. Rune felt him lie back down beside her, then turn his face toward her, his breath feathering her cheek. "My brother saw horrible things when he lived at the palace, things that damage a person irreparably." She thought of Gideon refusing the wine earlier. "There was a time when I needed it to survive." She wanted to know more, but it was wrong to pry one brother's secret out of the other. Alex hadn't really answered her question though. Gideon had disapproved of Rune since the day they'd met 5 years ago, long before this damage Alex spoke of. It seemed there was something unique about Rune that Gideon couldn't abide. It bothered her more than she cared to admit. Alex stretched out his arm toward her. It roused Rune a little, and she lifted her head, letting him tuck his arm under her like a pillow. "It's too late for Gideon," he said, turning her on her side and pulling her back against his chest. "You, on the other hand, can still be saved." If her eyes were open, she would have rolled them. "We've known each other for 7 years, she thought, remembering when she first met Alex. She'd been 11 and accompanying Nan to the Royal Library, which was a glass building full of every spell book in existence, before the Blood Guard burned them all and converted the building into their headquarters. As she wandered the aisles of the books, Rune heard music coming from somewhere in the library. The song brimmed with emotion, and she'd searched every floor until she found the boy playing it. In all those years, how many times have I needed saving? She must have asked aloud because Alex said, "It's not the times you don't need saving that I'm worried about. It's the one time you'll need it, and there will be no one to do it." If she hadn't been so tired, she might have pinched his arm. Instead, she shifted closer, nestling into him. Breathing in the clean smell of his freshly ironed shirt, Rune let herself relax for the first time all day. Alex was familiar. Alex was safe. "Rune?" But whatever he said next was lost in the sound of her snoring. 13. Rune. 2 years prior. The day Rune learned she was a witch, she was hosting Alex's 16th birthday. She'd spent months planning the event at Thornwood Hall, ordering the decorations, hiring the entertainment, and deciding on the menu weeks in advance. By the evening, Rune was tired and achy from being on her feet all day. But when the dancing began, there was a new ache in her body, an unfamiliar cramping low in her abdomen. It was so painful she couldn't hold a conversation, never mind concentrate on the steps of a waltz. But Rune was the hostess. She was determined to see the evening through to the end. It was only when a sudden wetness appeared between her legs that she excused herself and made for the bathroom. There, she hiked up her skirts, pulled down her underwear, and found blood. Black blood. That couldn't be right. It had soaked through the cotton, so she took the underwear off and ran the tap at the sink, shoving them under the water. Then she grabbed the soap and started to scrub, and scrub, and scrub. The stain wouldn't come out. In fact, it was spreading unnaturally fast. I'm not a witch, she thought, as black water circled the drain. I can't be a witch. The cramping worsened. Rune wanted to curl up in a ball on the floor and rock until it went away. This will be fine, she told herself. I'll hide these in my purse and go straight home to Wintersea. No one will even know. But when Rune glanced over her shoulder to check the back of her dress, she found the stain seeping through its yellow silk too. If anyone saw or had already seen, it wouldn't only be humiliating, but incriminating. Her breath sharpened. Desperation drove her now. She peeled off her dress and held it under the tap, scrubbing at the black blood, scrubbing until her fingers felt raw and her arms hurt. But the stain didn't lift, only spread across the yellow silk. She couldn't deny it any longer. The magic of her first bleeding was turning her dress black. I'm a witch. The realization turned her cold. The doorknob rattled. Rune jerked her head toward it, found the door opening, and quickly threw herself against it. There's another bathroom on the second floor, called Rune, her heart beating in her throat. Oh, Lola Parsons said from the other side. Sorry, Rune. Naked now, Rune pressed herself against the painted wood, waiting until Lola was gone before locking the door. This bathroom didn't have a window she could sneak out of, and the only door led to the hallway where Alex's guests walked back and forth. With her clothes not only wet, but growing blacker by the second, she couldn't leave. She was trapped. A knock on the door made her jump. Rune? Alex called from the other side of the wood. Everything all right? You've been gone for almost an hour. Alex, help, she wanted to say, but that would require admitting the truth, and if she did, he'd report her. He might be her oldest friend, but he'd also murdered a witch queen and been rewarded for it. Rune's wet clothes slipped from her hands, landing on the floor with a splat. Rune? Alex repeated. I'm not feeling well, she managed. The handle turned, but when Alex pushed, the lock held it shut. She stepped back, fear zipping down her spine. Rune, let me in. I'd really rather not, she whispered. You're scaring me, he said. I have the key, Rune. I can open the door myself, but I'd prefer that you do it. Knowing she couldn't stay in here forever, knowing she had no other choice, if she was a witch, Alex was going to find out, one way or another. Rune grabbed one of the bath towels and wrapped it around herself. She brushed the tears from her cheeks, unlocked the door, and stepped back. Alex opened it and the door swung in. He nearly stepped inside when the sight of her in nothing but a towel made him halt. "Why are you—" Spots of pink appeared on his cheeks, and he seemed about to look away when he noticed her tear-streaked face, or perhaps her smudged makeup. Finally he entered, shutting the door behind him. Rune backed up until her shoulders hit the wall, feeling like this was it, the end of everything, their friendship, her life. She sat down on the tiles, letting more tears fall. What is this really about? His attention snagged on her dress in a heap on the floor, then the underwear in the sink, the black stain still spreading across the fabric. Rune saw the realization sink in. His face fell. "Oh, Rune. No." He stood staring at the clothes, his hands curling into fists. "I'm sorry," she whispered. "Stay here," he said. "Don't leave this room." Without another word, he opened the door and stepped out, locking her in. "He'll report me now," she thought, lying down on the tiles, pulling her legs into her chest. She closed her eyes against the ache in her abdomen, weeping quietly, waiting for the blood guard to arrive. She could open the door and make a run for it, but what would be the point, and where would she go? The blood guard would only hunt her down. When the door opened, it was Alex who stepped inside, locking it again behind him. A bundle of clothes was tucked under one arm, and in his hand was a mug of steaming tea. Rune didn't bother sitting up. "These are Emily's," he said, setting the clothes on the floor beside Rune. Emily was his cook. "This is also from her." He set down the mug. "She says it will help ease the pain." She frowned, not understanding. "I'm going to prepare a hot bath for you, all right?" Rune pushed herself to a sitting position, watching him run the water in the tub. "Where's the guard?" He cocked his head at her. "What?" She cleared her throat. "The blood guard. When will they arrive?" Alex stared at her like she'd gone mad. "Rune, your secret is safe here." Letting the water run, he came back to her. Getting down on his knees, he touched her cheek. "You can sleep in the spare room tonight, and tomorrow morning, we'll figure out what to do." She stared at him in disbelief. "If they find out, they'll kill you too." He smiled at her, tucking a loose strand of hair behind her ear. "They can go right ahead." Rune flung her arms around him, clinging tightly. He pulled her close, holding her for a long time. It was there, in his arms, that Rune realized for the first time she could trust Alexander Sharp with her life. 14. Gideon. When Gideon finally arrived back in Old Town with his father's wine-soaked jacket in hand, he'd gone over his evening at Wintersea House several times in his mind. Had he made a mistake moving so fast? He had noticed the way Rune trembled beneath his touch and had a feeling she deliberately dumped that wine on him. He'd come on too strong. Gideon sighed, going over tonight's events one more time. Rune had certainly been a little awkward, if not downright odd. First, there was the weirdness with the wine, then her dismay over the telegram invitation, and last, her questions about his work while she tried to seduce him. It wasn't enough to accuse her of anything. For that, he'd need some concrete evidence, casting scars, for example, If she had them, he needed to find them. And if she isn't the moth? If she wasn't, why invite him to her bedroom? Why flirt so shamelessly? Unless she was actually interested in him. Not possible, thought Gideon. He trudged up the lamp-lit streets of Old Town, mulling everything over. It was foggy tonight, and as he approached the street leading to his tenement, the soft sound of footsteps echoed behind him. He glanced over his shoulder, but the fog was thick as smoke. As the sudden smell of roses bloomed in the damp air, a chill skated over his skin. "She's dead," he told himself. "You're imagining it." Still, thinking of the body they'd found beneath the bridge 3 nights ago, he increased his pace. The footsteps quickened in response. Gideon's stomach nodded. He reached for the pistol holstered at his hip, only to remember he'd left it at home tonight. The opulent halls of Wintersea House were no place for a gun. "You're a bloodguard captain. Footsteps in the fog do not scare you." But it wasn't the footsteps so much as the smell. Her smell. He was coming upon a footpath that led into the back alley behind his tenement. It was difficult to find if you didn't live in this neighborhood and already know it was there. As the footsteps started closing the gap between them, Gideon arrived at the opening to the path. He sidestepped onto it and pushed his back against the wood fence. If the pursuer knew about the path and followed him down it, at least he'd have the element of surprise. The footsteps grew louder, closer. Gideon tensed, ready to defend himself when the footsteps passed him by. He remained where he was, holding his breath. The fence behind him sagged as he leaned against it. As the footsteps receded into the distance, the pounding of his heart soon drowned out the sound. The smell of her was gone. Had it ever really been Beth, or was it all in his head? "You're an idiot. It's probably a lamplighter heading home for the night." Pushing away from the wall, Gideon remained on the footpath, taking it to the back of his tenement. The door there didn't lead to his apartment directly, but through the abandoned space below, the old tailor shop that once belonged to his parents. Gideon boarded it up years ago and rarely had a reason to enter it. Earlier tonight, however, he'd gone inside looking for fabric and sewing needles to stitch Rune's flower. The shop's interior door opened onto the stairwell leading to the apartments above. Gideon entered the shop and was halfway to the door when something made him stop. "I don't have a dress to wear," Rune had told him. "My seamstress is booked until next month." Gideon fumbled through the dark until he found the matches he'd left near the door earlier this evening. He lit a lamp and the flame's orange glow illuminated the room. Walls lined with bolts of fabric, a large work table for measuring, cutting, and sewing, a back room for taking customer measurements, and a front counter with a dusty old register. Gideon stalked towards the fabrics, where a dozen leather-bound notebooks lay stacked on a shelf. He hadn't touched these notebooks since his parents died. They were full of his father's notes and his mother's sketches, detailing her original designs. Gideon lifted the only blank notebook from the shelf, grabbed a piece of charcoal from the jar next to it, and pulled a stool up to the work table. If his mother were designing a dress for Rune Winters, what kind of dress would it be? He started sketching. The black charcoal burst across the white page as he thought of Rune on the love seat, her rose gold hair flaming in the light of the lamps, her skin flushing as his fingers traced her pulse stumbling as he leaned in to kiss her. Again, he scolded himself for intimidating her. but she was the one who invited him back to her room. She had summoned the wine. She had made the first move. Either way, he needed to keep up this charade. If she was the moth and the one leaving corpses scattered across the city, the closer he got to her, the easier finding evidence of her crimes would be. And if she wasn't, someone close to her likely was, and it would be in his best interest to infiltrate her inner circles by courting her. If she'd let him, that is. Gideon's plan was forming on the pages of his mother's sketchbook. He kept drawing until he ripped out more pages than what remained in the book. He kept drawing until the side of his hand and wrist were black with charcoal and his spine hurt from bending over so long. It was dawn by the time he had a design he didn't hate, one he could work with. The question was, would she like it? 15. Rune. Rune's riding boots crunched the stone path cutting through the university's campus where she was meeting Verity and Alex. The blustery wind eddied the dirt into the air and swirled the hem of her riding cape. The pink granite face of Summer Hall greeted Rune, its studded wooden doors shut tight. Hoisting her satchel higher on her shoulder, Rune pulled open both doors and stepped inside. Purple wallpaper greeted her, patterned with giant dahlias, and green tiles clicked beneath her boots. There were 4 dormitories on the university's campus. Summer Hall was known for its pastel colors and botanical patterns. If the moment you walk in, you're accosted by flowers on all sides, you found the right place, Verity told her the first time she gave Rune directions. She smiled to the girl at the front desk who waved her past, used to Rune's frequent visits. The walls changed to blue irises, then yellow sunflowers as Rune turned down halls, making her way to Verity's room. She knocked on the small door, and when it swung in, Verity looked out, squinting. Her dark brown curls were flat on one side, and her spectacles were missing. She looked like she'd just woken up. "Sorry I'm early," said Rune. "I need your help with the spell." Verity blinked. "I completely forgot about our meeting." "Oh, do you want to reschedule?" Verity shook her head. No, come in. Just step over the mess." Rune followed her friend into the tiny closet-sized dorm room, shutting the door behind her. Clothes lay in heaps across the few feet of floor between the wall and the bed. Piles of books leaned against the walls, and glass jars crammed the shelves. Some jars held living things within them, insects, small rodents, while others held dead things preserved in liquid. Rune spotted Henry the mimic spider in the biggest jar, already snacking on some winged thing he'd caught in his web. Verity shoved the scattered clothes into one pile, making room for Rune on the floor. "I'm sorry for last night," she said, kicking aside a stocking. "Oh, what for?" Shrugging off her satchel, Rune pulled out a spellbook. "When I saw Gideon in your bedroom, I overreacted." Verity sat on her small bed, staring straight ahead at the white roses on her wallpaper. "I remembered the Blood Guard soldiers coming for my sisters, and I guess I panicked." Verity rarely spoke about her mother's betrayal of her 2 eldest daughters, witches, both. All 3 DeWild sisters had been extremely close. With the heavy tome still in her hand, Rune sat down next to Verity and reached for her hand, which was ice cold. Rune rubbed it between her warm ones. It was always so drafty in this room. What happened to your sisters was horrible, said Rune. I'm sorry for scaring you. Verity shook her head. I just don't want anything bad to happen to you. You're the closest thing I have to family now. Throwing her arm around Verity, Rune pulled her close, trying to comfort and warm her simultaneously, noticing how bony her shoulders were getting. Wasn't Verity's scholarship supposed to include meals along with boarding? You're the closest thing I have to family too, said Rune, leaning her head against Verity's. You and Alex. Verity nodded to the spell book sitting on Rune's lap. What did you need help with? Rune opened the book and turned to the spells she'd been practicing, Picklock and Deadbolt. Across the page were two symbols, each one an inversion of the other. They're Minora spells, so I should be able to cast them using the blood you gave me, right? But when I try, it's like wading through sludge, and nothing happens. Verity took the book and pulled it onto her lap. These are more complicated Minoras. You probably need fresher blood. Can you show me? Nodding, Rune reached into the inner pocket of her riding cape and pulled out a glass vial, half full of blood. Verity waited, pulling her legs onto the mattress and crossing them beneath her. While Verity was not a witch herself, her sisters had always let her sit in on their spell castings. Verity had gleaned far more from her sisters than Rune had ever gleaned from Nan. So when Rune had trouble with the spell, Verity was the person she came to. After pushing up her sleeves, Rune rose from the bed and approached the door to Verity's room. Verity was an expert at cleaning blood from any surface, so Rune didn't hesitate. After locking it manually, she pulled the cork stopper out of the glass vial, dabbed her index finger in the blood, lifted her hand, and began drawing the symbol for picklock on the wood of the door. 3 interconnected lines, 2 straight, 1 curved. Casting spells was like playing a musical instrument or cooking a delicious meal. The more you studied and practiced your craft, the more skilled you became. Or that's how it was supposed to work under normal circumstances. Because Rune used old blood, her spells were weaker than if she had used a fresh source. Fresh blood, and a lot of it, was required for more powerful spells. Making things more difficult was being restricted to the small amount of blood from each monthly bleeding, limiting the number of spells she could cast as well as the type. Mirages, for example, were illusions. They tampered with people's perceptions. Mirages were Rune's spell of choice because they were less complicated and required less blood. Minoras, on the other hand, did things to change the material world, like locking and unlocking a door, and were more challenging. A Minora required the fresh blood of the witch casting it. Using Verity's borrowed blood was a way to cheat, because blood from someone else always boosted the power of a spell. But it only worked so well, and only some of the time. It was like trying to cook a mouth-watering feast when the only ingredients on hand were some withered root vegetables, stale bread, and smelly fish. You could cook the food, but it would be neither mouth-watering nor a feast. Rune dabbed blood onto the pads of her fingers and started to draw the symbol. As she dragged the mark across the door, the taste of salt bloomed in her mouth and a familiar roar echoed in her ears, like the roar of the sea. For Rune, casting spells always felt like swallowing the ocean, like she was standing in the surf as the tide came in, only it was coming in faster and more forcefully than was natural, and it took all her strength to keep her feet planted and not get thrust over. Vroon shut her eyes as the magic swelled and her body trembled from the effort. The sea roared louder, its brackish taste stinging her throat. She clenched her teeth and kept drawing, forcing more of the bloody symbol onto the door in front of her. Pain throbbed in her temples as that invisible wave started to crash. Vroon felt its weight descending. She braced herself, trying to finish the mark as it came tumbling down on her. Her hands shook harder. She gripped her wrist, trying to steady it. There was only one line left to draw. "Vroon," said Verity. Her voice sounded muffled, far away. "I can do it. It's almost done." "Vroon, stop! You're going to—" The next time the wave swelled, Vroon lost her footing. The spell crashed down, and her legs buckled. Vroon collapsed beneath it, drowning in that thunderous roar.